He who builds not his foundations first might with great virtue build them afterwards, but with danger to the architect and instability to the building. Niccolò Machiavelli.
Picture the exact moment when the numbers on your bank screen suddenly shift, transforming into a figure most people won't accumulate across 10 lifetimes. Maybe it's a no-name asset that went parabolic overnight, an inheritance dropped in your lap by a relative you barely remembered existed, or the compounded result of years of grinding that finally detonated into a life-changing event. In that first second, you feel an almost supernatural surge of invincibility, as if the universe has finally acknowledged your edge and thrown every door wide open. But here's the brutal irony: that peak moment of triumph is also the precise moment of your maximum vulnerability, because sudden wealth doesn't simply upgrade your lifestyle, it strips you completely naked and puts your true character on full display. Machiavelli wrote that fortune resembles a defiant woman who favors the bold but ruthlessly abandons anyone who fails to lay the groundwork before her mood shifts.
Wealth doesn't automatically install wisdom into the operating system. It simply scales whatever was already running. Your habits, your vices, your blind spots. Small hairline fractures in your character become load-bearing failures under the weight of serious money. The data compiled over the last 50 years paints a genuinely terrifying picture of how fast wealth evaporates in the hands of the unprepared. Across multiple longitudinal studies, more than 70% of people who receive a sudden, massive windfall are completely broke within 5 years. These aren't people who simply misplaced a few million. They blew up their families, spiraled into addiction, and permanently destroyed the baseline peace of mind they had before the money arrived. The core reason for the collapse is a fatal misreading of the game. Most people assume the hardest part is getting the money, when in reality the real examination begins the moment you try to keep it.
If you never develop the discipline required to build capital systematically, you will never possess the qualities necessary to defend the capital from the threats coming at you from every direction, external and internal alike. Machiavelli anticipated this paradox in the 16th century, noting that rulers who seize power purely through blind luck lose at the instant fortune stops covering for them. But awareness of that danger typically arrives for most people only after the first visible cracks appear in their financial foundation, and the people around them start to notice. Your first and most powerful weapon in the fight to preserve what you've built is absolute, almost tomb-like silence. The culture surrounding you, drenched in conspicuous consumption and performative flexing, will push you hard to announce your success, stack up the loudest possible luxury signifiers, and prove your significance to whoever is watching. But the moment you put your net worth on public display, you voluntarily paint a target on your back that draws in every opportunist, every con artist, and every social parasite operating in your zip code. Real power has always lived in concealment, in the ability to own the room while projecting the appearance of someone who's running lean. The sharpest players in today's game practice a form of stealth wealth accumulation where the public image stays deliberately understated while the actual influence compounds exponentially behind the scenes. The story of Jack Whittaker, who won a $315 million Powerball jackpot in 2002, stands as the darkest available case study on the cost of going public. He chose the role of benefactor, handing cash to strangers, donating millions to churches, and funding community projects, genuinely believing that goodwill would insulate him. Instead, the attention transformed his life into an unending conveyor belt of lawsuits, armed robberies, and personal tragedies that ultimately consumed every dollar and cost him the people he loved. Rather than chasing the crowd's approval, you need to redirect every unit of energy into building an invisible legal fortress. Machiavelli counseled princes to construct fortifications capable of withstanding the longest possible siege, and in the 21st century those walls are sophisticated legal structures. Your wealth should never sit in your name directly. It needs to be controlled through layered entities, irrevocable trusts, and holding companies stacked in the right jurisdictions. The first call you make after a liquidity event should not go to an exotic car dealer. It goes to a battle-tested asset protection attorney who also knows tax planning cold. On paper, You should look like an ordinary citizen with a moderate income, while your actual resources sit behind a legal shield that makes a direct attack functionally impossible. Remember, you cannot fight an enemy you cannot see, and wealth structured behind multiple layers of entities is extraordinarily difficult to strip away. This principle is precisely what allowed dynasties like the Rothschilds to compound their influence across 2 full centuries while staying out of the line of fire from hostile governments and angry mobs. But even the most airtight legal structure becomes worthless if you cannot neutralize the most dangerous adversary, the one living inside your own skull. Psychological stagnation is the silent assassin that activates the moment you decide you no longer need to compete for your survival. A lot of people operate under the genuinely catastrophic delusion that the entire point of wealth is permanent idleness, infinite leisure on tropical beaches where time loses all meaning. But Machiavelli warned with complete severity that idleness softens the mind and turns a man into easy prey for anyone who keeps their edge and preserves their hunger. When you surgically remove the necessity of solving hard problems and pushing through real resistance, your cognitive capacity begins to atrophy at a pace that would alarm you if you were watching it happen to someone else.
Iron discipline is replaced by impulsive decision-making and emotional volatility, effectively making you a hostage to your own worst instincts. A person stripped of forward momentum inevitably becomes a victim of their own weaknesses, which will dictate the terms of play in their new reality, far more ruthlessly than any external competitor ever could. The most successful operators alive understand this mechanism completely, which is why none of them stop working after hitting their first major milestone. They simply recalibrate the scale and depth of what they are building. Jeff Bezos didn't walk away after his first 10 million. He turned his company into an impregnable global citadel. Warren Buffett has maintained the same disciplined daily structure for more than 60 years, fully understanding that consistency is the most lethal weapon available in high-stakes finance.
These individuals are not working to survive physically. They are working to preserve cognitive clarity and maintain absolute command over their operating environment. They understand that wealth without rigid structure is simply a catastrophe with a delayed trigger, set to detonate at the worst possible moment. If you choose to wall yourself off from productive engagement and sink into pure hedonism, you will discover with alarming speed that your decision-making faculties have gone dull and your instincts have become completely unreliable. But that internal decay is merely the leading indicator of a far more tangible threat buried inside the financial paperwork from your past. You need to immediately identify and eliminate every high-interest obligation on your balance sheet, even if you're now sitting on 8 figures.
Machiavelli pointed out that threats inside your own house are categorically more dangerous than external enemies because they remain invisible until the fatal moment arrives. Debt carrying 20 or 25% annually is a toxin that consumes your principal faster than any inflationary cycle or bad trade you'll ever make on a public market. Paying off that debt on day one of your wealth event is the mathematical equivalent of locking in a guaranteed 20% return with zero market risk. This isn't simply a capital efficiency play. It's the single most important strategic maneuver for clearing foreign influence out of your personal financial ecosystem. The moment you break those credit chains, your psychology undergoes a fundamental transformation that moves you permanently out of the debtor mindset and positions you as the unencumbered owner of your own trajectory. That shift in how you process reality is critical because it rewires your relationship with money, from a tool for paying bills to a weapon for capturing asymmetric opportunities. You stop reacting to external pressure and start dictating terms from the clean, solid ground of a debt-free balance sheet. But once you've cleared the numbers, you'll quickly discover that clearing the people is a far more complex and emotionally expensive operation. Machiavelli understood human nature more precisely than any modern behavioral economist, and he stated plainly that people will sooner forgive the murder of their father than the loss of their inheritance, or the elimination of their ability to feed at someone else's table. The moment your circle detects serious money, their orientation toward you shifts permanently. even as they swear eternal loyalty and pure selfless friendship with complete conviction. That is only the first assault on your illusions, because the hardest tests will come from the people you've always called family. The moment you become the holder of serious wealth, every relationship in your orbit quietly transforms into a field of hidden political maneuvering and unspoken transactional dynamics. Machiavelli wrote in chapter 17 of his most famous work that human beings are by nature ungrateful, fickle, hypocritical, and acquisitive. While you're delivering value and writing checks, they will pledge undying loyalty and offer their blood and the lives of their children. But the moment your generosity has a bad quarter, they will be the first ones to flip. Your wealth awakens dormant entitlement in the people closest to you and surfaces a deep, long-suppressed narrative of perceived injustice that they will now justify through the lens of your luck.
Friends and family members will construct elaborate internal stories about how your success was simply a function of timing and circumstance, which means, by their logic, you owe them a share of the upside for standing by you during the lean years. But the instant you capitulate to that pressure and convert personal relationships into financial transactions, you trigger an irreversible mechanism that will systematically destroy your entire social infrastructure. You need to internalize this clearly. Any attempt to lend money to a friend or a family member is a disguised death sentence for that relationship. If they can't pay it back, resentment and shame will quietly build inside them until it metastasizes into open hostility directed at you as the creditor. If they do pay it back, the transaction leaves them feeling indebted and diminished, which corrodes the foundation of genuine trust and equality in ways that never fully heal.
Machiavelli cautioned rulers never to give away anything they could not reclaim without triggering a revolt or deep, lasting contempt. The same principle operates at full force in the world of serious money. The moment you become a recurring source of income for the people around you, they stop perceiving you as a human being with your own interests and feelings. You become an impersonal financial institution, an ATM expected to function on demand, never malfunction, and never ask inconvenient questions. The solution to this dilemma is what I'd call strategic generosity, a framework that requires genuine steel will and absolute clarity around where your boundaries sit. If someone in your immediate circle hits a genuine crisis, a serious medical situation, a truly unnavigable life emergency, you can step in.
But you make it a one-time gift with no strings and no expectation of return. And you establish immediately and firmly that this gesture will not repeat itself under any circumstances. You need to make explicit that this is a deliberate personal choice, not an obligation, and certainly not a response to guilt or social pressure. This approach, paradoxically, commands far more respect than endless accommodation of small requests, which only breeds dependency and erodes whatever regard people still had for you. You want to project warmth from a distance, but when someone crosses the line and attempts to breach your perimeter, you need to be cold, clean, and completely unreachable. The most vivid and genuinely tragic illustration of what happens when these rules get ignored is the story of Mike Tyson, a career that became the definitive symbol of breathtaking ascent and total annihilation.
Over the course of his professional life, Tyson generated more than $400 million, a number that should have compounded into multi-generational wealth for his bloodline. By 2003, he was filing for Chapter 11 with $27 million in outstanding liabilities to the IRS and his creditors. The primary driver of that collapse wasn't just the insane personal spending, the Bengal tigers, the gold-plated fixtures. It was the army of hangers-on and extended family members he financed for years, all of whom created a convincing theater of loyalty. The moment the cash flow stopped, they dissolved. He was left alone in the wreckage of everything he had built, with no one to hand him a single dollar back. But that betrayal was only the opening hit, because losing the loyalty of your inner circle is always followed by losing control of the engine that generated the wealth in the first place. Your power and your security cannot be built on the approval of the people around you. They must rest entirely on your own self-discipline and an unyielding financial framework that you enforce regardless of who's in the room. Machiavelli believed that preserving an elevated position sometimes requires projecting severity and even coldness, specifically to prevent systemic collapse from spreading through the ranks. If you cannot deliver a firm, clean no in the early stages of your wealth journey, you will very quickly discover that your net worth is being liquidated by a rotating cast of dependents operating on your goodwill. People remain aligned with your vision for exactly as long as it delivers them a tangible payoff, or as long as they genuinely believe you will not bend. Establishing hard limits early is not cruelty. It is the only method available for preserving your own humanity and shielding the people closest to you from their own lowest instincts. Your wealth is a vehicle for consequential action, not a subsidy fund for other people's absence of ambition and unwillingness to compete. Once you've erected the defenses against social parasitism, it's time to confront the single most dangerous trap in the entire game. The one that has destroyed more fortunes than any financial crisis, war, or market crash in recorded history. That trap lives inside a fundamental misunderstanding of the difference between principle and yield, between the engine and the fuel it produces. The overwhelming majority of people who suddenly access serious capital make the same fatal error. They start spending the principle itself, operating on the unconscious belief that the supply is inexhaustible. They acquire real estate they can't rationalize, yachts they can't fully crew, and trophy art they don't understand, never processing the fact that each acquisition not only reduces the foundation, but creates a compounding annual cost structure that accelerates the drain. What genuine wealth holders understand at a level that most people never reach is this: your capital is a sacred, non-negotiable engine that must run in perpetuity. Think of your money as premium agricultural land that fortune itself placed under your stewardship. If you harvest intelligently, that land feeds you and your children for decades, generating stability and compounding prosperity across generations. But if you start burning the topsoil to stay warm on a cold night or to impress the neighbors, you will very soon have nothing left to plant in. That is precisely what happens when people upgrade their lifestyle to a level that requires continuous withdrawals from the principle. They feel like masters of the universe while cycling through new cars and renovated properties every 2 years. But what they are actually doing is accelerating their own financial self-destruction on a timeline they refuse to look at directly. The authentic expression of elite thinking is the ability to consume only what the system generates, leaving the mechanism itself completely intact and protected from any encroachment. But reaching that level of thinking requires a deep internal rewiring, the kind that prepares you to manage not just money, but an actual sovereign entity operating within your family structure. The single most important distinction separating those who remain at the top for decades from those who flame out almost immediately is a simple rule that is extraordinarily difficult to live by. Never consume principle. Live exclusively on what that principle generates.
Machiavelli argued in his writings on statecraft that the wise ruler never relies solely on fortune, but instead constructs systems that continue to function after fortune withdraws her favor. Your wealth is your private army, and every dollar inside it is a committed soldier whose sole mission is to return to the fortress with 10 additional soldiers captured from the market. The moment you start pulling from principle to fund luxury purchases, you are voluntarily executing your best operators and degrading the defensive perimeter of your financial compound. You need to hardwire into your thinking the understanding that money in your portfolio is not a purchasing mechanism. It is an energy generation system that exists to be protected, not touched for transient gratification. To accurately assess how genuinely free you actually are, apply the formula that professional capital allocators call the Rule of 25. The logic is clean and unambiguous. Calculate the annual burn rate required to sustain your lifestyle at a level of genuine comfort, excluding pure excess. If that number is $200,000 per year, your baseline financial independence threshold is $5 million deployed into conservative instruments. At a 6 to 7% average annual return, that $5 million generates your $200,000 annually while the principal itself remains completely untouched. Every single decision about acquiring a new asset or upgrading your lifestyle must pass through that filter. Does this move reinforce the foundation, or does it quietly hollow it out from below? But this is only the first layer of architecture required to build a legacy that outlasts you, because true capital preservation demands a level of strategic planning that goes considerably deeper than the surface math.
Your wealth needs to be organized like the army of a great military commander from antiquity, where each distinct unit serves a precisely defined function, calibrated to current market conditions. The first unit is your growth engine, a broadly diversified portfolio of global equities and low-cost index funds that bets on human ingenuity, technological innovation, and the long-term expansion of the world economy. This allocation is structurally designed to compound across decades, not quarters. The second unit is your iron defense, investment-grade bonds and fixed-income instruments that stabilize the entire system when volatility spikes and risk assets get hit. When markets enter full panic mode and equity valuations go into free fall, this is the allocation that holds its composure and provides the liquidity you need to act rather than react.
Machiavelli called this the balance of forces, maintaining an aggressive posture on the field without crossing the line into recklessness or unjustifiable risk concentration. The third unit of your financial army is tangible assets, specifically, quality real estate in irreplaceable locations. For the past 500 years, the most powerful families in Europe held land not for status performance, but for the physical stability that no paper asset can replicate. Real estate provides persistent cash flow and functions as a structural hedge against inflation, quite literally anchoring your wealth to the physical world. The fourth unit is your intelligence operation, your speculative capital, emerging technology, high volatility instruments, Bitcoin, Ethereum, and the category of assets that can generate asymmetric returns in the right environment. You allocate a deliberately small portion here, 5 to 10% of total capital, sized so that a complete wipeout doesn't threaten the fortress, but a major win dramatically accelerates your trajectory. Machiavelli admired the boldness of pioneers, but he reserved his contempt for those who wagered their entire state on a single hand at the table. The fifth unit is your strategic dry powder, cash and near-cash equivalents that preserve your ability to maneuver instantly at any point in the cycle. This is what funds your capacity to act decisively when everyone else is frozen by fear, or when a genuine asymmetric opportunity appears on the horizon and requires immediate capital deployment. In the periods when everyone around you is forced selling quality assets at distressed prices just to stay solvent, you are the one who maintains absolute composure and executes the best trades of your career. The ability to remain patient when the crowd is losing its mind, and to move with precision when the moment is right, that is one of the most valuable qualities that serious, properly structured capital confers on its holder. Machiavelli stated that the wise ruler always maintains reserves for war, and in the financial world that principle operates with absolute precision and zero exceptions. When you integrate growth, defense, real assets, and liquidity into a single coherent system, you construct a machine that generates income from multiple independent, non-correlated sources simultaneously. That architecture does not depend on the performance of a single company, a single market, or even a single country. It converts your net worth into a genuinely impregnable financial citadel. Historical evidence demonstrates consistently that this kind of balanced, multi-layered structure is what allows wealth to survive across multiple generations, shielding it from political upheaval, economic depression, and the full spectrum of catastrophic risk. The great banking houses, the Medici family in the 15th century being the most studied example, achieved their extraordinary staying power precisely by distributing resources across multiple geographies and industries through complex, interlocking systems. They thought in centuries, not quarterly earnings cycles, understanding at a foundational level that real power demands patience and iron discipline applied to every single allocation decision. But behind the facade of that ideal system lies another layer of reality entirely, one connected to your personal understanding of why any of this was worth building in the first place.
Even Machiavelli himself, For all his ruthlessness and total preoccupation with the mechanics of power, acknowledge that dominion over the world, without personal fulfillment, leads only to an interior void and a complete loss of any sense of purpose or direction. He drew a sharp distinction, however, between two categorically different types of pleasure: the kind that sharpens the ruler's edge and reinforces his capacity, and the kind that corrupts him and makes him a subject of contempt in the eyes of the people he rules. Spending driven by status anxiety is the most dangerous trap available to an underdeveloped mind, because it is structurally impossible to win that game permanently. There will always be a yacht that runs 5 meters longer than yours, a rarer reference on someone's wrist, or a more exclusive room you cannot buy your way into, regardless of the number in your account.
If you enter that loop of infinite comparative diminishment, no amount of money will ever register as sufficient, and your life becomes a meaningless sprint toward mirages. But that assault on your ego is only the opening move, because genuine enjoyment of wealth demands a far more sophisticated and deliberate operational philosophy. You should carve out a defined portion of your capital that functions as your personal freedom fund, money you deploy without calculation, without guilt, and without any performance metric attached. These are the resources you direct toward what genuinely resonates with your internal value system, your intellectual development, your physical optimization, and the acquisition of rare experiences that remain completely invisible to the general population. Machiavelli believed that external displays of power had a legitimate function only when they served a specific strategic purpose, when they reinforced your authority in the eyes of people whose perception actually mattered. In every other context, visible opulence is a tell. It signals insecurity, draws unnecessary fire, and generates the precise variety of envy that creates long-term problems. When you direct resources deliberately toward education, physical performance, and the construction of meaningful projects, you are strengthening the architecture of your identity, making it more resilient against any external disruption the environment might produce. The authentic expression of serious stature is the ability to carry enormous influence while appearing completely ordinary on the surface, concealing the full scope of your capability behind a mask of unassuming normalcy.
Once your financial system reaches steady state, and the mechanisms of protection and compounding begin operating on something close to autopilot, you will inevitably arrive at a new cognitive altitude, the level of legacy thinking. At that elevation, money ceases to function as a survival tool or a comfort purchasing mechanism. It becomes pure operational philosophy. You begin interrogating what footprint you intend to leave in the world, and what will continue to generate value after you are personally no longer managing the enterprise. The most consequential actors in human history never limited themselves to gold accumulation in the basements of their estates. They deployed capital into ideas, into the development of exceptional people, and into the creation of systems that continue producing value for 50 or even 100 years after their departure. But that was merely the first step toward a form of institutional immortality, because real command over the future requires the complete abandonment of short-term noise and the distractions of the present. At this final stage of the evolution, wealth becomes a form of quiet, almost imperceptible influence over the trajectory of history and the structure of entire communities. You stop pursuing near-term yield and begin engineering complex social and economic architectures that reshape the environment around you. You no longer respond to opportunities as they surface. You manufacture them yourself, deploying capital as leverage for changes that operate at a genuinely systemic scale. You begin thinking in decades and centuries, arriving at the clear understanding that real wealth is not a number in a custodial account. It is the demonstrated capacity to shape the future according to your design. Machiavelli urged his readers toward boldness and decisive action, arguing that it is categorically better to move and be wrong than to hesitate while time drains away through your fingers. In the world of serious money, that directive translates into a direct call to move from passive ownership into the active construction of meaning that outlasts its architect. If fortune ever drops a sudden, life-altering windfall in your lap, resist every instinct to celebrate that victory in public with an audience watching. Understand from day one that this gift is simultaneously your most severe examination, one that will demand steel discipline, absolute composure, and near total operational invisibility. Structure your assets, shield them with airtight legal architecture, eliminate internal threats in the form of high-cost debt, and never allow the world to identify where your actual leverage points are.
Your wealth is your personal fortress, your standing army, and your operating philosophy. And every element of it must remain concealed from adversaries until the moment when any countermeasure they might deploy is simply too late to matter. Hold on to the words of the great Florentine, who wrote that a prudent man should always enter paths blazed by those who were truly great, and emulate those who were most exceptional. Because even if his own greatness falls short of theirs, he will at minimum carry something of their quality in everything he does. But this was only the first lesson on a long road, because the deepest principles of durable influence reveal themselves only to those who have learned to listen carefully to silence. If the frameworks presented here have genuinely recalibrated your perception of reality and forced you to interrogate your actual position in this game, do not stop here.
Everything laid out above is the surface layer of a vastly deeper body of knowledge, covering the psychology of power, the mechanics of real influence, and the unwritten rules that govern serious capital at the highest levels. The majority of people who encounter this material will watch it, feel a momentary charge, and return to their ordinary routines within 5 minutes, back to the comfortable fog of illusion and low-ceiling expectations. But if you feel in yourself that specific, restless hunger that drove the great builders and empire architects of history, your place is here, among those who choose precision strategy over ambient chaos. Subscribe to this channel, because every piece of content produced here is engineered to sharpen your mental models, increase your market value, and widen the operational gap between you and the undifferentiated majority. There is no noise here, no filler, and no content designed to make you feel good without making you more capable.
This is cold strategy only, driven by principles that have survived centuries of real-world stress testing. Decide right now which category you occupy. The people who watch other people's wins from the sideline, or the people who take the calculated risk of engineering their own outcome, according to the logic of maximum strategic leverage. Your time is worth more than any dollar amount you can currently place on it, and investing that time in the right mental frameworks is the highest returning allocation you can make toward the future you are actually trying to build. Stay in the shadows, compound your capabilities in silence, and never show your hand before the moment is fully yours. We will continue our descent into Machiavellian thinking in the next installment, where we examine methods of environmental control that are considerably more sophisticated and considerably more dangerous than anything covered here.
Your new operating reality begins the instant you accept that the rules of the game are not fixed. They can be rewritten by anyone with the clarity, the discipline, and the nerve to pick up the pen. Until we meet again at the top, where the air is clean, and the only limit on the view is the scope of your own ambition and the raw quality of your imagination. Everything discussed here was only the opening move, and what comes next will go considerably deeper.